Should you really be greasing your hitch ball? And what other maintenance should we be performing on the coupler lock, the underjaw, or the receiver? Depending on who you talk to, you're gonna get a variety of different opinions. So I went right to the source. I spoke with 5 major hitch manufacturers, and I think you're going to be surprised with their responses. Now, before we get into the video, there's something important to note. What we are covering today is maintenance for an underjaw style coupler that looks like what you see on the screen now, and a fixed hitch ball, which means it does not rotate in the ball mount assembly. If you have something different, like a collar lock coupler, if you have a hitch that connects to the trailer using a more complex connection setup, like a Pro Pride or Hensley hitch, or anything that looks similar to those hitches, this is not your maintenance video. Today, we're covering standard underjaw couplers and fixed hitch balls. This is what 90% of you will have, but if you do have something different, I don't want to waste your time. Okay, with that out of the way, I'd like to start with the mounting bolts and hardware on your hitch first. You have bolts that mount the actual hitch frame to the bumper or frame of the truck. You'll have bolts that mount the shank or drop shank to the ball mount. Don't forget the bolt and nut on the bottom of the ball itself, and you'll also have mounting hardware on the frame hangers. So is there any maintenance needed on these bolts? Well, they're bolts, so there's nothing you can really do except some visual checks every once in a while for condition and to make sure that they're properly torqued. So how often should we be checking the torque on these bolts, if at all? And all the manufacturers that I spoke with said that you should not need to check these bolts very often if they were torqued properly when the hitch was installed. I've also made my rounds to other RVers and mechanics. I've heard everything from once a month to once a year, and of course there are some folks who are never checking these bolts. To be honest, I don't even know if there really is a universally correct answer. I think the right answer would depend on a few different things. For example, how often you tow, how far you tow, how much weight you tow versus how much weight the hitch is rated for, the physical condition of the hitch and the truck where the hitch mounts, as well as the road conditions on which you tow. Personally, I put a torque wrench on these bolts one time a year, right at the beginning of the camping season. This is also a good time to just do a visual inspection of the hitch under the truck to check for any rusting or rotting. If your hitch is welded, you'll want to check those welds. And of course, if you ever hear or feel something weird while you're towing, all of these bolts would be a good place to start troubleshooting. In 8 years, I've never had a bolt loosen up, but I continue to check them once a year at the beginning of every camping season. I would be very interested to know how often you guys are checking these bolts, if at all. Let me know down in the comments. Now, here's a tip. Once you know they are properly torqued, draw a line on the bolt and the nut using a paint marker or a Sharpie, and you can just visually inspect these each time you're hooking up to see if they're loosening up at all. Now, if they are loosening up, it could be due to a few different reasons, temperature changes, vibrations, but one of the big reasons these could be loosening up is because they were not properly torqued when the hitch was installed, and in that case, the bolts may be stretched. So if you are noticing these bolts loosening up, it might be a good time to start fresh, replace the bolts with new hardware, re-torque your bolts, and monitor from there. Moving on to another maintenance point, the hitch pin that locks the shank to the receiver, and all they're really doing is suggesting to put some white lithium grease on the pin so it doesn't seize in the receiver. I've never done it, I've never had any seizing issues. However, I think a white lithium grease or corrosion prohibitor like Boscheld T9 on the pin makes perfect mechanical sense. And by the looks of my hitch pin, I should probably start doing this too. This one's pretty simple. I don't think we need to spend any more time on the hitch pin. White lithium grease or Boscheld T9, and then just monitor from there. While we're talking about the receiver, this is an area that is flat, it's level. It's also an area where water likes to sit. I think any rust preventative will work inside the receiver channel. White lithium grease will work. I use Boscheld T9 here. I'll just spray some of this inside the receiver. Now, I've switched trucks since I bought this hitch, so I do use a reducer. Spray again, then install my shank. This is something I do every 3 months. One of the reasons I like T9 is it can be used all over the RV. Stabilizer jacks, door hinges, awning hardware, and something I forgot to mention when we were talking about the hitch pin, if you have a locking hitch pin, you can spray some T9 right inside the keyhole to keep the tumblers moving smoothly. I've talked about Boscheld T9 in other videos. I'll link to it and everything else down below in the video description and the first comment. There's also a lot of coupon codes for you guys down there, so definitely worth checking out if you want to save a few bucks. Okay, moving on. Should you be applying grease directly to the hitch ball? I reached out to 5 major hitch companies: Dexter/Equalizer, B&W, Blue Ox, Anderson, and Kurt, who is now owned by Lippert. Every single company said you should be applying grease to the hitch ball except for Anderson. Now there is a very specific reason why Anderson doesn't want you applying grease to the hitch ball on their weight distribution hitch. Their design is unique in that the ball actually spins with the coupler as you turn. Since there is no friction between the ball and the coupler, no grease is needed. In fact, adding grease can actually interfere with the ball and the coupler moving together. Long story short, we can't use Anderson's input for fixed hitch ball maintenance because their hitch ball is not fixed. And number two, the obvious one, if you have the Anderson weight distribution hitch, do not apply grease. Okay, so back to the question, should we be directly applying grease to the hitch ball? I know there's a lot of you out there who don't do it, probably never have or never will. That's okay, we can still disagree and have a beer together, but we do have all four major manufacturers telling us to directly apply grease to the hitch ball. From a basic mechanical standpoint, we have metal on metal twisting and turning. Personally, I've seen the benefits of applying grease directly on the ball, or should I say that I've never seen any negative effects from applying grease on the ball, except for occasionally getting some grease on my jeans. So I'm gonna say yes, go ahead and grease your hitch ball. The next question is, what should we be using? And this is where things get a little convoluted. Blue Ox recommends Moly grease, B&W recommends white lithium grease, Dexter/Equalizer says white lithium grease or mechanical lubricant. They did not further elaborate on what mechanical grease meant. I'm going to assume a general or all-purpose grease. And Kurt/Lippert said Moly or axle grease. So the question now is, why are we not getting the same answer from these different companies? My first thought, and some of you might be thinking this as well, all of these hitches are designed a little bit differently. Some are using solid fixed sway bars, some use chains or a combination of both. The weight distribution designs are no doubt different from each other. However, there are two things among all of these hitches that are exactly the same. We have a fixed metal hitch ball and where the ball mounts, the underjaw coupler. Knowing that, I think we're getting different answers for one very simple reason. Moly grease, axle grease, and white lithium grease will all work on a fixed hitch ball to underjaw coupler design. The tongue weight on travel trailers is anywhere from 500 to 1,000 pounds, even a little bit higher in some cases. That's definitely a lot of weight for you and I to pick up. However, in the grand scheme of mechanics, that is not a high pressure application. Additionally, unless you're zigzagging through an obstacle course, there's not a lot of consistent side-to-side or spinning action between the hitch ball and the coupler. And therefore, it's really not a high heat application either. I've used all three over the years with the goal of trying to find out which one seems to work the best. And to be honest, I did not see a difference between any three of those greases. I think all will work perfectly fine. If you want the corporate answer, just use what the manufacturer recommends. All the manufacturers are recommending to use something to grease the hitch ball, and I think that should be the takeaway. Okay, how much grease should you apply? The first thing I do before applying new grease is clean the hitch ball with the solvent to get all the old grease off. You can use mineral spirits. My preference is a product called Shop Solve. It's a virgin solvent, it's non-chlorinated, and it works great on grease. Once all the grease is off the hitch ball, you may notice a little surface rust. This is where I use another product from Bow Shield called Rust Free. I just spray it on the hitch ball, let it sit for about 2 minutes, and then I'll use a gray Scotch-Brite to clean it off. Rinse and repeat if necessary, guys, and then make sure the hitch ball is dry before applying the grease. Surface rust is not uncommon, but in my experience, the key to keeping the ball in good shape is frequent cleanings. Now, when applying grease, all you need is a smooth, flat layer to cover the ball. There's no need to goop it on. If you're using a spray, same thing, guys. Get a nice coat around the ball, and that's it. So how often should you be re-greasing the hitch ball? Another question you're going to get a lot of different answers on depending on who you talk to. The manufacturers want grease on the ball every time you tow. However, I don't think that means you need to reapply grease every time you travel. I would say the condition of the grease is more important than having a predetermined schedule. First and foremost, the grease needs to be clean. Keep an eye out for dirt and debris, which can act like sandpaper and damage the ball and inside the coupler. And if the grease is in good condition, is it fully covering the ball? If it's not, just apply more to the uncovered spots. If you're enjoying or learning something from the video, please like, share, comment, and I also hope by the end of the video we've earned your subscription. This leads us to the coupler itself. Now, once you unhook, it's easy to see the condition of the grease on the ball, but remember, you're going to have built up grease up under the coupler as well that you probably haven't cleaned as much as the hitch ball. So don't forget to occasionally clean the grease underneath the coupler. You can spray Shop Solve or your preferred solvent and clean it out with a rag. Like the hitch ball, the coupler cleaning frequency should be based on the condition of of the grease. Now, do you need to directly apply grease to the underside of the coupler? Not one manufacturer I spoke to said yes, including Lippert, who manufactures the majority of travel trailer frames and couplers. Remember, the entire surface of the hitch ball does not make contact with the entire surface area inside the coupler. So spraying grease inside the coupler may just add extra grease that doesn't need to be there. That untouched grease may attract dirt and debris, and you may need to clean it more often. If you properly cover the hitch ball with grease, any point that ball makes contact inside the coupler is also going to be lubricated. Now, will it hurt anything if you spray some white lithium grease under the coupler? I'd confidently say no, so I would label greasing the coupler as a personal preference thing. The important thing though is that the entire hitch ball is covered with grease. Now, on top of the coupler is the coupler lock handle. This is just a simple mechanism that pushes the underjaw underneath the rear side of the ball that prevents the tongue from lifting off the ball. It's just another metal on metal mechanism. On the coupler lock, I've been using Boschel T9 to keep it moving freely. I'll spray it down inside the mechanism a little on where it hinges, move the lock around a little, and let it dry. Lippert also agrees lubricating the coupler lock is a good idea. Now, I lube the coupler lock once a month. That's probably more than necessary, but it's easily accessible and doesn't take very long to do. And one more thing while we're here, the underjaw can actually wear out over time. In some cases, it could wear out before the hitch ball. It's kind of hard to check the condition of the underjaw with a 50-pound hitch hanging underneath, but if you have an extra hitch ball laying around, it should fit snug in the coupler with the lock closed like you're seeing here. It will spin and rotate because it's a sphere. It's designed to do that, but it shouldn't move straight up or down. If it does move up or down, the coupler lock assembly may need to be adjusted or replaced entirely. Now, I've never had to replace my coupler lock, so I've never made a video on it, but I will put a link to a video down below that talks more about the adjustment and replacement. My hitch is the Blue Ox Sway Pro. It has these spinning chain hangers that I'll just shoot some T9 behind and around all the moving parts. Some quick visual inspections on the bar chains. I'll hit the locking bar pins with some T9, and I'll push some fresh moly through the Zerk fittings on here as well. I'm checking all these miscellaneous parts on my hitch usually about 2 times per year. Most of you won't have the same hitch as I do, so just do a visual inspection on the sway bars and all associated hardware. Boschel T9 is a really nice lubricant for all these metal on metal moving parts, and because it's a rust preventative, you can literally spray this on anything you want to prevent from corroding. Okay, over to the chains. There's nothing complicated here. You're back here a lot, so it's easy to perform occasional visual inspections where they connect to the frame. If you have removable hooks, check the hardware and cotter pins. I'll spray some T9 on the safety clasp of the hook, and you can also use Boschel Rust Free on the hooks to clean off the surface rust, which is something, as you can see, I really need to do this year. Also, once a year, I'll quickly pull the pin on my emergency trailer brakes to make sure it hasn't seized. This would also be a good time to check the electrical functions of the junction box. I usually do this when I de-winterize and check through a lot of the electrical connections, but definitely worth mentioning for this video. I'll finish up by visually inspecting the brake cable and replace any hardware as needed. Also up front here is the tongue jack. Now mine is a sealed and maintenance-free jack. At least Lippert has nothing as far as regular maintenance in their manual, but it might be worth checking with the manufacturer if you have something different. And since it's maintenance-free, all I really do here is a visual check on the cotter pin assembly on the foot. Now I'm sure there's going to be a few of you watching this video who aren't doing exactly what I'm doing. Maybe your frequencies are a little different, but it's important to note that everything I've been doing and everything that I've shown you in this video today has been working for me. I think it's also important to note that a lot of the things that I talked about today come directly from the manufacturers of this equipment. So I don't think there's a consistent plan that will work for every single RV. There's a lot of different factors, but hopefully the information in this video at least gives you an idea what to be thinking about. The hitch and the tongue are 2 of the most important pieces of equipment on your RV. Properly maintaining them makes getting from point A to point B a smoother and safer ride for you and your family. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you consider subscribing, and we'll see you soon.